Reviewing the 2021 film Don't Look Up, I think, is incredibly important because of the subject matter of the film and the time in which it was released. Not just the time it was released, but the time that it was filmed. It was filmed in late 2020 and very early 2021. And it's important to talk about what was going on in the United States as this movie was made in Hollywood. You can see there's several Hollywood stars. You got Jennifer Lawrence, Jonah Hill, Leonardo DiCaprio, and there's plenty more. So what I was expecting going into this film was it being incredibly pro-lockdown, right? Because that's what was going on in the world. What was going on specifically in the United States was when the world shut down for this 2 weeks to stop the spread, the United States went into what I would consider a 40% lockdown on a global scale of how countries lock down. The United States was probably in 40% lockdown for about 3 months. Then they went back to normal, relatively normal. They went into an incredibly soft lockdown. To even call it a lockdown is a little ridiculous at that point, but I would say they were at about a 15% lockdown. Major sporting events weren't happening, or they weren't happening with crowds. They had like empty arenas. I remember there was hockey games, and I live in Canada, just on the border of the United States. I was born in the United States. I have tons of family over in Michigan, so in states that aren't Michigan as well. So I visit the United States quite a bit, so I have a very fair perspective of both countries. So the United States continued on their 15% lockdown into the following spring, and the end of the lockdown was kicked off with WrestleMania 37 in the spring of 2021. I'm not exactly sure on the date that Don't Look Up was released, but it probably would have been around there. Who really cares? Actually, I think it was a bit later, I guess. So I think it actually would have been like this, about the same month as WrestleMania. Now, granted, I don't know if movie theaters were fully back open yet in the United States. They certainly weren't in most countries. So movie releases were very strange in that time. But like I said, I was expecting nothing but pro-lockdown, pro-CDC propaganda in this film. And that's not what I got. And even when I've heard people talk about this film, which is literally like 2 people ever in my personal life, they seem to misunderstand what this movie is even like trying to say. Because in the film, there's some like cataclysmic event that's coming. There's stuff from space, like meteors or whatever, asteroids are coming, and they're clearly coming. You can like see them, but the media's telling you everything's going to be fine. Hence the title, Don't Look Up. And the media is telling you, don't look up. Now that, from a Canadian perspective, to hear from a Canadian person, in the year 2024 was when I heard a Canadian person talk about this film and refer to the people refusing to look up and the people telling people to refuse to look up as right wing. That is hilarious. Because that is not the message that this movie is putting forward, right? Like, I don't even understand how somebody could be dumb enough to have that perspective. Most of the media is heavily left-wing. So most of the propaganda that comes from the media is inherently left-wing. And, like, all of the media is, owned by companies that also own the government. Like, the government, and the governments, like, the Canadian government was a liberal government. Like, has been since 2015. So what in the world are you talking about? What planet are you living on, dude? Like, I was shocked to hear this because it's so stupid and literally inaccurate to what's going on in the movie. Because it's like, you need to connect this to reality, sir, is what I wanted to say. But I couldn't even engage with this guy's take was so horribly wrong. The movie itself is pretty good, right? Because it's not about politics, and it's not about COVID. It's not about any specific thing. It's about the idea of like media propaganda and how people go along with it and perpetuate it, which is what was going on in the world at the time. And who was doing that was very heavily left-wing people, right? Because the media was saying, if you aren't wearing a mask at all times, even when you're not around people, if you're socializing at all, you're killing grandma. You've created the spread of this virus, even though that's fundamentally against everything that scientists had been saying. I'm not talking about the propaganda that the CDC was pushing out, because that wasn't science. That was stuff, like the CDC is funded by Pfizer and all the big pharmaceutical companies who were selling literally billions of people the vaccine. So, like, they were clearly the propagandists. And I feel like me living in Canada, I need to talk about what was going on because it was insane. Like, a lot of Americans can't even begin to appreciate what was actually happening. Like, we were in various states of, like, you were in 40% lockdown for 3 months. And then maybe 10 to 15% for another, like, 8 months-ish? If at all. In Canada, we were in anywhere from 60% lockdown to 95% lockdown. And the government just flip-flopped it constantly. So businesses were allowed to open, but boom, now you got to close. Now this, now that. Now you have all these restrictions. You can half open, but then you got to close again for a few months. Like, completely gutted small businesses. The amount of people out of work, lost their jobs, their business was gone. Because what business can survive that? A lot could not, right? A lot tried and failed because it's unsustainable. It's completely unsustainable. It was insane. There was so much division in Canada. People ratting each other out, stabbing each other in the back. The restrictions here, you cannot even begin to believe. In 2021, when this movie came out, what was going on? What were these restrictions that were so crazy? Look at this. And this isn't just something that I'm pulling up from pictures. I experienced this. I saw this, right? Firsthand. And when I told my American relatives about this, their jaws hit the floor. They're like, why would Canada ever do that? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. That doesn't even begin to make sense. How would it help people from not being able to buy diapers for their baby? How are baby diapers not an essential item? And other supplies, including medical supplies, for not only babies, but literally just every person. You couldn't buy dog food. It was insane. But I'll pull up some pictures, because some people have never heard of this. They've never seen this. Like, because in America, in 2021, in the summer of 2021, and this happened like late spring of 2021, you couldn't buy stuff that wasn't food. You couldn't even, like, certain medical supplies, you couldn't even buy. They literally shut off areas of stores. Now, most stores, they're, like, gutted, right? Because this is 2021, and they've been, like, barely been able to open insano, bizarro stuff. Like, look at this. So a lot of them just hung up rope or a wire or something. And some of these stores, like, this is a dollar store. Some of the dollar stores, I heard, you couldn't, if you literally walked past the rope and grabbed an item and rang it through the self-checkout, either a person would come and say, you're not buying that, or it wouldn't allow you to ring it up, right? Now that I didn't experience firsthand. I, in fact, went to a dollar store, and there was stuff I needed to buy. Like, I'm going, and I'm buying some stuff in the section that you're not allowed to go in. And if you think of a dollar store, there's usually like one aisle of food, and then all the other stuff is like rando supplies. And I needed supplies. Like, this was critical. So I'm like, I'm gonna go, and I'm taking that stuff and I'm ringing that stuff out. Hopefully it works. I dare them to try to stop me. The employees there, like, I'm not a tough guy, but I am 6'2", and I'm like, I'll throw hands. I'll walk out of the store with this merchandise if I have to. I'm not walking out of here without this merch. I didn't say this to anybody, but that was my thought process. Was I'm buying this stuff if they'll allow me to buy it. If they're not allowing me to buy it, I'm walking out of here with it. If they're going to try to stop me from walking out of here with it, so be it. I will definitely, I am going to physically do what I can to get out of the store with this stuff. I don't want to steal anything. I would never want to steal anything. But if it has to happen, it has to happen. If the police get called, the police get called. But no, this was everywhere. This was Walmart. This was all stores. If your store doesn't sell food, it could not be open for a time. For like 2 months. I think it was a 2 to 3 month period. Because I was amazed that it wasn't just instantly changed. I was amazed that people went along with it. In this time, locally, at our local Walmart, so somebody followed the rules. They didn't go in the roped off area. Right? They didn't. They were just in the food area. And in the food area, there was those sections that aren't really like stuff that's on the shelves of that particular aisle. But you know how there's like sometimes merchandise like stacked in the like wide laneway that's like not the aisle? There was cups. This guy was buying cups. And so he's, takes it to the cashier, and they're like, you can't buy these cups. He's like, what? What do you mean it's cups? And they're like, you can't buy this. He says, I didn't, this was amongst the groceries. Like, I grabbed it from over there. I didn't, like, go and find this. You guys put this out. So, therefore, shouldn't it be available to buy? And how is it not essential? It's cups. I'm using this to consume liquid, to consume food. If food and liquid are essential, this helps you consume that. Like, how are cups not essential? But keep in mind, at the time, the baby diapers, medical supplies for babies, medical supplies for everyone, cut off. You couldn't buy it. You couldn't go in that section of the store. Like, some stores stacked like cases of stuff, like pallets of stuff, so you couldn't physically go to certain areas. Some places just used rope. And it was that insane. So that they didn't let this guy buy the cups, so he left in a huff and like pushed a cart over or something. Which, good for him. I'd have done more. Seriously. And think about that. Who does that help? Whose health is being improved by people in this small city in Ontario? A city of under 80,000 people. You can't buy diapers for your baby. How is that stopping the spread of COVID? Who is this helping? Like, not everyone has an Amazon Prime account and can just get this stuff quickly delivered to their house. Like, there's poor people who don't have a choice but buying their stuff from a dollar store, from Walmart. Right? And that was only made worse by gutting small business in that time. And it's so disgusting that the government ever even did that. But people went along with it. People went along with it. And even if you looked at the numbers of active cases in this county, in this town, single digit. Whole time, single digit. Sometimes double digit. We never even came anywhere close. I think at the height, we had 22 active cases in the entire county. And I live in this city that I live in, very small, under 80,000 population, most of which are elderly people. This is a retirement area where it's mostly old people, and a lot of those people are in like retirement homes, old folks' homes. They're in basically an apartment building for people who are old and need additional medical care. So what that means is, even in non-lockdown times, you're not really interacting with all that many people, right? It's not like all these old people are all out and about all the time. And this is Canada, right? Like, we were in such a lockdown. Even if you didn't lock down, people are still following the rules. People aren't idiots. People were doing stuff to prevent spreading this virus. And all of this never made any sense. And this was like the most extreme time of the lockdown. But it was a very extreme lockdown. Very extreme. And it's hard for Americans to even start to fathom that. But let's continue. So another thing happened, and this happened in 2022. So after this movie was released, to be fair, so it's not like this movie could have possibly known how genuinely horrific it was in Canada, right? Or how it would become. But it remained horrible. They continued to dick around. They created vaccine passports, keeping people out of work, making these insane restrictions on the border, which just screwed over truckers. Like trucks transporting like essential goods are getting slowed down, stopped. Like essential goods aren't making it to people. Medical goods, food isn't making it to people because of these ridiculous restrictions that the Canadian government was imposing. This insanity. And they're telling you, don't look. Don't think about it. Don't even begin to think about it. Don't think about the impact this is having on anyone. Oh, so what? You've been out of work for 2 years. Who cares? Quit crying about it. Oh, you need a haircut? You're an asshole because you need a haircut. It's not about the haircut. No one on the planet needs a haircut. What it's about is the single mother who needs to cut hair to put food on the table for her kids, who's going to lose her place because she can't afford her rent, because she's not working. She's not getting those tips because the government's telling her you can't for years, and her kids are hungry. That's what it was always about. That's what it was always about. Hollywood would never touch this with a 10-foot pole. Even years later, they haven't even. Have you heard any word about a movie about this trucker protest, which was a huge, giant, international protest? Yes, it was centered around Canada, and it was a trucker convoy going to Ottawa. But this was epic because you know what the result of this was? Restrictions went away. Lockdown stopped. The government had to listen. This was a very successful, unbelievably supported protest. Holy crap. The final anti-lockdown protests here locally, I don't know why that's zoomed in. My camera's crazy. You gotta use this crazy technique to unzoom it in. So, this protest was epically successful and supported by the 95% of Canadians. Maybe not 95%. There was people against it, but those were like the most liberal jackasses in the world. Maybe it was like, I don't know what percentage, but you couldn't. For a while, if you spoke out against this, if you spoke out against the lockdowns, you were a pariah. You would get attacked by other Canadians. So on social media, like just your comments would get blown up. Family members, friends, lifelong friends, divided, separated, pitted against each other by the media. Exactly what was happening in Don't Look Up was what was happening in Canada on an epic scale, right? If you spoke out against, people should be able to buy like basic supplies and diapers for their baby, you are a science-denying, anti-vax lunatic. Was kind of the mainstream narrative until this convoy. This is when people started to actually wake up, started to actually maybe not it's around this time. It was what led to this, was people waking up and finally seeing like, hey, what is actually going on? We've been out of work for years. Like, my business was destroyed. I lost everything. I'm now in an insane, unbelievable amount of debt. My everything I had saved for the future is gone. What are we doing? How have they done this to me? How are they doing this to everyone? This is demented. There's no thought process. This government has failed round every corner and continues to, and is harming people. And maybe we should have listened day one. Not exactly day one, but relatively day one, when Anthony Fauci said, we can't let the reaction be worse than the virus. We 1,000,000% allowed the response to be worse than the virus in Canada. 1,000,000%. And you know what this really was about? Preventing? Not just these kids from going hungry, but this. It was about preventing this. It was all about preventing this. And right here, this is where I live, Sarnia. This is our local tent city. Well, now it's like January, but it's only gotten bigger. And that's what we wanted to avoid. That's why we were protesting the lockdowns. That's why we didn't want this. We saw this coming in a major way. And we fought to reduce the effect, but the damage was done. It needed to stop being done, or this would be 20 times worse. But this is a problem, and this is a problem that's going to get worse, right? We have a housing crisis, insane inflation. Do you think maybe freezing the global economy, countries like Canada, right, which is unlike the United States, basically most countries that aren't the United States froze everything. Everything. We live in a global economy, right? Like United States, you have a giant impact on the global economy, but you're not everything. The world can screw you over, and that's what's happening. That's why it's at your door. That's why it's happening to you, right? Like in Canada, we're your biggest trading partner, and this giant protest had a lot to do with us dicking ourselves over, and it was completely insane. It was insane. And then when this protest started, you saw a giant shift, an enormous shift, because all of a sudden, it's like a light. Someone flicked a switch. It's like all of a sudden Canadians looked up and it's like they opened their eyes finally and were like, what is actually going on here? And they saw what was going on and they're like, holy crap, we need to do something. This is horrific. We bought into the division that the media was shoving down our throats, the pure stupidity, the lack of logic. We let Pfizer make our decisions for our government, for us, We let them do whatever they wanted. They told us to stay home and not work and just shut up and get the vaccine. And we thought that made sense. Because what actually happened is what the governments didn't do is they didn't listen to science. They didn't listen to scientists, people who actually know what they're talking about. During that first 2 weeks to stop the spread, scientists said, if you actually listened to scientists directly, not media scientists, not, the narrative that's being shoved down your throats, just raw scientists talking about what they think about what's going on based on nothing but data and logic. What people were saying in the scientific community was basically they were saying what Anthony Fauci said. That's where Anthony Fauci got it from. Like, we can't let the response be worse than the virus. Because what did we know about the virus? And what do we know about the virus now? That 80% of people who get it are asymptomatic, meaning they have no symptoms whatsoever. You wouldn't even know you had it. All right, that's not that bad. It only takes out an incredibly small amount of people. Okay, that sucks. Some people are going to pass. That's terrible. Okay, but luckily, it's a very small percentage. Now, that percentage is going to result in a lot of people because everyone's going to get it. But, okay, maybe we can hold out till a vaccine. Nope. That's not what scientists are saying. They're saying we cannot wait for a vaccine. There's no time. An effective vaccine takes 2 years to develop. And this is spreading faster than anything we've ever seen. It's spreading at a rate that every person on the planet will have already gotten it, probably multiple times, before we could ever get an effective vaccine to people. We cannot lock down and stop the spread. We can slow the spread, but we cannot stop it. Mathematically, that's impossible. Like, all science says that's impossible. There is nothing we can do to stop this. We can't vaccine our way out of this. We're screwed, and a lot of people are going to pass, and that sucks. But we need to mitigate damages here. We need to make sure that we don't flip out. We need to not raid stores and people hoard stuff. Here in Canada, I don't know if all of Canada, but my section of Ontario, we had like toilet paper. Instantly, the toilet paper was hoarded. It was gone. You couldn't get toilet paper. There was a week and a half where I'm like, I'm gonna run out of toilet paper. I don't know what to do. Like, there's no toilet paper everywhere. People are freaking out. How am I gonna get toilet paper? Luckily, personally, someone I know posted, and this was like bright and early in the morning, right when a grocery store opened, that there's toilet paper there. So I hopped in my car and went right there. Luckily, there was some toilet paper, so I was set. But yes, that's what scientists were saying. They're saying this virus is going to hit everyone in the coming months. Everyone on the planet. This is spreading faster than anything we've ever seen. This is beyond uncontrollable. Even the idea of shutting everything down for 2 weeks fundamentally doesn't make any sense. Yes, it will slow the spread, but it will do basically nothing to stop it, and it will barely slow it at all. In theory, the concept of every person on the planet isolating for 2 weeks, yeah, that would work. The people who have the virus would process it, they would get through it, and then they wouldn't be able to really spread it. And then that would stop it. But that would require literally every person on the planet, billions of people, not interacting with each other, even remotely. No humans contacting at all. For 2 entire weeks, billions of people, and no one messes it up. Nobody messes it up. That's crazy. That could never happen. That's unrealistic. That is super unrealistic. And not only that, what viruses do, if a virus is more contagious than anything we've ever seen, that means that like the flu, like the common cold, it is going to mutate into different strains. So even if we get a vaccine in 2 years, this thing will have cycled through the entire human population like nothing we've ever seen, and it will mutate multiple times into multiple strains. And through that, it will make the whatever vaccine we were developing and get out not effective against who even can begin to imagine how many different strains of this are going to exist by then. This isn't going to work. What we need to do is open stuff back up, tell people the reality that you need to focus on your physical health. If you're overweight, you need to lose weight. You need to eat healthy and eat less. You need to have good cardiovascular fitness. You need to take care of yourself and prepare to get sick, because that's what's going to happen. We can't wait it out. That doesn't work. It can't work. All science says that it cannot work. Right? That's what scientists were saying, if you were listening at the time. But the problem is nobody was. Nobody had their eyes open. They had the attitude of somebody like the complete moron Ethan Klein, who said, "Why would you even think about it? The government takes care of that. Why would you even think about it?" And what he was saying, Ethan Klein there, and what the entire media was saying, was what the propagandists in this film, Don't Look Up, were saying. Close your eyes. Why would you even look? Don't look. Why even look? Why even think for yourself for one moment? That's crazy. There's experts for that. The science says you need to not work and just wait for the vaccine. Just take the vaccine. Who is the science? It's just this group we made called the CDC. You know, it's owned by pharmaceutical companies that are selling you the vaccine. But whatever. And I'm going to use some examples now, some personal examples of the insanity of the people who refuse to look up that I encountered in my personal life in these times. Because these stories are crazy. Like I said, on social media, you had, especially in Canada, right? Like, this never even had the chance to get all that divisive in America. Like, your government did the right thing by leaps and bounds. Now, granted, your healthcare system is enormously superior to ours. Like, ours is a joke. I remember during the height of the Omicron variant here in Canada, when the county that I live in had the highest active cases we had ever had, according to our media. Now, granted, I didn't even know anybody who had it at that time. I still don't know a person who's even passed from COVID here in 2025. But still, when we were at the height, when our local government and our provincial government was saying, you need to be as severely locked down as ever before. This is the worst of it. Things are going to go berserk. Now, granted, the cases we had was 22. This was after you couldn't buy diapers, after the insano lockdown we had experienced and gotten out of. Just, that was the 95% lockdown. But things mellowed out and we were at 80% lockdown. Way more lockdown than America ever experienced. And like I said, when I told my American family about this, they're like, "What? COVID? That was last year. What do you mean? Like, COVID's been over for a year here. Like, like people don't even talk about it. Like, that was a long time ago. What the? You're still locked down there? What? They're roped off sections of stores? Why? Like, who would that help? What are they doing? So, the worst of the worst. And they're saying don't go to the hospital. That's what the local news is saying. Don't go to the hospital here. We got more COVID cases than ever. It's going to be a madhouse. It's going to be chaos. You're going to get COVID. I happened to tear a ligament in my foot getting out of bed. Don't know how. Step out of bed. Oh my God. Like, just my entire left leg, I think it was the left side, just foot was toast. I couldn't put any weight on it. I'm like, oh God. Oh God. This is like the worst time, right? The media and social media is saying this is psycho. Do not go to the hospital unless it's like an insano emergency. I'm like, oh God, it's gonna be lunacy there. It must be loaded up with people. There's gonna be tons of COVID patients. This is gonna be insanity. I go to the hospital. Like, I call my mom. I'm like, I can't walk. I need to get to the hospital. She picks me up, drives me down there. She goes and get inside, gets a nurse. Nurse comes out with a wheelchair. I climb into the wheelchair. We go into the triage area, which normally, in normal times, like now, if you go there, you're probably waiting like 5 to 6 hours if you go into the like emergency entrance. If you're basically going to the hospital to seek treatment, you're waiting 5 or 6 hours. And there's going to be a bunch of people waiting who look like they're like wanting to fall asleep, just in the most miserably bored and impatient, because they've been there for like 5 hours. But this time, unlike any time I've ever gone to the hospital, empty. Absolutely no one in Emerge. No one. I'm like, what? That's weird. So then they wheel me into the, like, right into the, like, second room you go in, where usually you get, like, a doctor comes, talks to you. If you only need really quick care, like an x-ray, they'd come and talk to you eventually. Like, sometimes you could be waiting in there for an hour. But a doctor comes talk to you, sends you, a nurse brings you to where you get an x-ray. But that's not exactly what happens, right? So the nurse takes me in there, wheels me in, and begins shooting the shit with about 5 other nurses. I've never seen that many employees in this hospital in one place at one time. But it was like 5 nurses and 1 doctor standing in a circle shooting the shit. Like, you know when you see somebody's body language and they're super, like, casually, like, leaning on something, and you can tell they've been standing there for a while, and they're all smiles. They're just shooting the shit. They've clearly none of them have done work in what I assume was hours. They're having a blast, right? The media is telling you, don't go to the hospital. It's going to be a madhouse. They're going to be overwhelmed. That was the whole part of the propaganda here was, oh, you're going to overwhelm the healthcare system. You're going to overwhelm the healthcare system. Oh, we need to stop the spread to an absolute extreme at all costs, because what if we overwhelm the healthcare system? And keep in mind, this is the most cases we ever had in this county at a time, at about like 20. Little over 20. And the hospital was a ghost town. And the people working there, bored, shooting the shit, never seen them look so bored and just, because usually they have stuff to do, work to do, but this time they didn't. So they take me right into x-ray, give me my x-ray, and, prescribe me some I think it's just like a pain medication, and I already had crutches. They're like, do you need crutches? I'm like, no, I got crutches. So I went home. Torn ligament, healed. But what the media and social media made it out to be is like, our hospital's going to be super overwhelmed. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Complete opposite. But when the media says that, when they say, oh my God, it's Omicron. This is lunacy. We're overwhelmed. This is crazy. People believe that that's what's happening. And it's the opposite. I was pretty shocked. I'm like, man, I've never seen it so dead. I've never gotten care this fast in my life. This is insane. Like, they took me into the x-ray area and just took my x-ray. I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, this is the third waiting room area that I've been into, and I haven't had to wait in any of them. This is unheard of. I would be at like hour 8 if this weren't COVID times. So, just complete horseshit. The Canadian government, the Canadian media, complete horseshit. But the interactions that I think were very important, that I think the movie Don't Look Up, that what it's ultimately about is stuff like the people I interacted with at the first lockdown protest that I went to. So this would have been, I think, like maybe late spring or probably early to midsummer of 2020. So not that far into all of this, but an important time. Because, like I said, it's more about people not being able to feed their kids, people losing their job. Like, say this woman cuts hair for a living. Well, not only is she not making money in that time, or if she is, it's like a government handout, which is tiny, and her kids need food, but maybe that hair cutting place that she works at, since they're not allowed to be open, isn't going to reopen. So maybe now she's out of a job forever. You know what I mean? So, stuff like this convoy was absolutely critical. But way before this convoy, just like people like me saw this tent city coming, I'm not sure if they'll go back to the tent city. Just like we saw it coming, just like the Ottawa protest, what they were protesting was the negative impacts that were happening right then and there. But those impacts are very long lasting. They have a ripple effect. So not only were people's lives being destroyed in those years of lockdown, but that destruction will wreak chaos on those people and their children, and potentially their children's children to an extent. Right? We're seeing drug crisis, overdose to crazy extents, homelessness to crazy extents, people losing everything across this country. I just saw it coming earlier than a lot of people, and considered other people. And I was an essential worker, right? Like I was working. I was making more money than I ever had in my life. And it was kind of nice, right? Like where I worked at, it was kind of nice having less people around. It felt shitty. I'm like, man, all these people, like they need to work. Like they need this work. Felt super horrible for other people. So that's why I'm like, you know what? I'm making more money than ever. I'm not somebody who even likes big crowds. This there's some nice things for me personally, but I care about other people, and other people are getting destroyed, demolished, right? I'm like, this is evil, and this is going to have destruction for a generation, right? And this was before I even really thought about the impacts of keeping kids out of school for like 2 years. There are kids in Canada who are like 3 years behind in their education because of the severe lockdowns. I don't know how they're ever going to recover. Like, it's just insane, the impact that all of this has had. But anyway, so summer of 2020, I go to a protest. Not very big, more people weren't too aware of what was going on. Very few people had looked up. Their eyes were closed. So, what happened? There was counter-protesters. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. There's counter-protesters. I wonder what their perspective is. It's important that I go and cross the street and talk to them, because I feel like they're probably going to be like somewhat misinformed. Let's see what they have to say, right? So I go and talk to them, and there's 4 of them in total. There is a crazy guy who's wearing a bunch of clothes, who's got a sign, and is angry, pacing around, all angry. He's shouting stuff, mostly just swear words, kind of just very aggressive. So I expected him to like walk up to me immediately when I walked over, and he kind of did, but he just shouted swear words. I'm like, okay, so you're an idiot. And he walked away and started pacing, like, you know, not in my vicinity. Okay, like, that's sad. And then there was 2 girls, probably like 19, 20. They both mentioned that they worked, because they both said, well, you know, we're out of work, but that's okay. Well, like, it's okay. No, we weren't, you know, we were only, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, probably 5 months into the initial lockdown. And they just hadn't really thought much about anything, but they talked to me. And, like, they were willing to try. It was sad, but they tried. So what these girls said was, we need to stay at home until there's a vaccine. That's, like, the first thing they said. Like, all right. And they had signs made up. Like, I didn't have a sign. I don't remember if there was probably about 10 people who were anti-lockdown who were doing the protest. Maybe one of them had a sign. And I don't remember what these girls' counter-protest sign even actually said. But, sorry, I had to blow my nose there. What these girls said was, we need a lockdown, stay at home, isolate, wear a mask until there's a vaccine. So I said, all right, typically it takes about 2 years to develop a vaccine. This virus is spreading faster than anything we've ever seen. This is what experts are telling us. It's in like every country on the planet pretty well. This is going to impact everyone. Everyone's going to get this before we can even possibly get a vaccine. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And they're like, well, what do you mean? So I explained a little more. I said, all right, well, it's spreading too quick. Everyone's going to get the virus before they get the vaccine. So why would we wait for a vaccine? If we do that, we're keeping people from working, and they need to put food on the table for their kids, and we're preventing that by having all these businesses shut down. Like, a lot of these businesses, some of these businesses have already said, we can't reopen. Like, we can't survive being shut down for months. We're screwed. we're sorry, but we will not be reopening when the lockdowns end. We're done. So I'm like, this is horrific. You got to think about those people who, not only the people who work there, but the people who run the small business who are just screwed. Their life's work is now gone. Their life savings is now gone. They're probably accumulating a ton of debt. On top of that, they're screwed. Their kids are screwed. It's going to negatively impact their kids for the rest of their kids' lives. Like any kind of support that their kids might have had is now erased. And they're going to go through some very tough times. Like, this isn't good to be doing this for people. They're like, oh, well, that's selfish. That's selfish. I'm like, I'm an essential worker. I am very much an essential worker. I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life. How can you tell me this is selfish if I'm doing great? I'm like, and I don't like crowds. I like to stay at home. I'm a homebody. I like, this is great for me personally, but for everyone else this is terrible. So that's why I'm here protesting. They're like, oh, well, no, it's selfish. Okay, like, what? Okay, all right. So I've had COVID. You want people you're hoping that the government just opens everything up once there's a vaccine. So once people get the vaccine, then they can be in crowds and socialize and go back to work, right? Like that's at that point it would be okay. And they won't have to wear a mask and do all this goofy stuff. They're like, yeah, all right, fine, sure. But I'll tell you, I've had COVID, right? Because I did. I had it very early on. I had it in April of 2020. I've had COVID. Therefore, I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to social distance. They're like, no, you'd have to. No. I'm like, well, but you just said if someone gets the vaccine, then they don't have to social distance. They don't have to wear a mask. They're like, yeah. Well, I've had COVID, so I don't have to wear a mask and I don't have to social distance. Well, no. All right. Do you understand what a vaccine is? No. All right, I'll explain it to you. What a vaccine is it takes the virus, weakens it, then gives it to you. You contract the virus, your body builds immunities to the virus, so then when you encounter the virus in the future, you have immunities to it. So it's like you're not getting the virus again because your body just fights it off immediately. It whoops its butt. That's how vaccines work. Flu shot, that's how it works. So you don't get impacted when you get the virus and you don't spread it to other people. That's how it works. So I've had COVID. My body has built immunities to COVID. Therefore, I've been vaccinated. They're like, no. I'm like, yes, this is how vaccines work. You can look it up. You can, like, there's over 100 years of like, this is what all medical science says. Yes, I'm right. But they're just like, okay. I'm like, so, in conclusion, I've had COVID, therefore I have immunities to it, so I don't have to social distance, I don't have to wear a mask. They're like, no. Like, all right, then what you're saying doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I'll make the argument for you. Just because I've had COVID, this thing is spreading faster than anything we've ever seen. Therefore, everyone on the planet's going to get it. There's nothing we can do to stop that. We can barely even slow it if we try. What this will do is, because it's going to go through every person on the planet, it's going to become different strains. So I don't have immunities to those different strains. But the problem is that that's going to perpetually happen forever. But because that's going to happen, and it takes about 2 years to make an effective vaccine, it's going to be 2 years every time. So that 2-year window is just always going to be pushed forward, and it's going to literally last forever, like the flu shot, forever. Like if we did that for the flu, we would be in lockdown at all times for eternity. That's not good. You've said you understand what I'm talking about when it comes to the negative impact these lockdowns are having on people, but you're saying we should be in lockdown forever, that there's no end to this. Are you saying that there should be no end to these lockdowns and restrictions forever, and people should be like just business shouldn't exist? Like what? Like no one outside of essential workers should ever be able to work forever? You think that makes sense? They're like, no. And I'm just like, okay, then what do we do? What is your solution? I have a solution. My solution is we move forward. We say, hey, people need to take care of their health, and we need to get people back to work and get things back to normal, because we're causing a ton of damage that's going, because it's economic damage. It's going to be severe. It's what causes homelessness, drug problems, overdose, like mental health. It destroys all of that. We're destroying all of that. We're ruining millions of people's lives. We're essentially killing millions of people. And so that was pretty much the end of that conversation. They just had no idea, had never even, no concept of what a vaccine even is, or any basic logical solution to the problem. They just didn't even think about it, right? It's insane. Completely insane. Because think about this. These people went to a protest, an anti-lockdown protest, made signs to go to this protest, to counter-protest, and couldn't hold a basic conversation. Didn't even know the basic fundamentals of how a virus works, how an illness works, how a vaccine works. Like, think about how stupid that is. Think about how much someone has to have their eyes closed to do that. Like, first of all, the raw stupidity is insane. It's genuinely insane. And it's not just the outright stupidity of having the inability to hold a conversation, to have any understanding of what you're counter-protesting, but to even be doing the counter-protesting, to oppose basic logic to the point that you're going to a protest in order to counter-protest. You made a sign that, like, I think the sign said something like, wear a mask. Like, what the, like, you haven't given any thought as to why people are wearing a mask. It's like you just heard on the media, oh, you're supposed to wear a mask. Pfizer says wear a mask. Oh, Pfizer, they must know that's good, right? Oh, it's so stupid. It's unbelievable, right? And then to hand ultimate authority over to Pfizer, to say, hey, Pfizer, you can control what most governments in the world do because you've never done anything wrong. These people are insane. These people are beyond insane. Blind. Choosing to be blind. Because all this stuff is so simple to look up. Like, you can't be bothered to look up basic, like, 101, how a virus works, how a vaccine works. You fundamentally don't understand those things. And it's not just these idiots counter-protesting. It was countless idiots on social media trying to argue. Like, I remember being, like, amazed. I'm like, I feel like hundreds of people have tried to argue this with me on social media. None of them have even come close to presenting a decent argument against what I'm saying. None? Like, that's good. That's insane. Because normally, when I argue with people on social media, eventually somebody's going to have at least a decent counter argument. But with this, no. No. It's just, didn't exist. People just bought into what Big Daddy Pharma, who was selling them the vaccine, told them to do. It's incredible. So, the angry guy. So there was 4 people, right? 2 young girls didn't know how a vaccine worked. Angry guy, and then a middle-aged woman as well. And the angry guy was also middle-aged. So I talked to the middle-aged woman, and we have a totally reasonable conversation. She just felt like people... she basically agreed with me on almost everything. Well, literally everything. She was just like, oh, well, people... people need to take care of their health. She's like, her side was that people just need to focus on taking care of their physical health. And I'm like, that's what everyone on the anti-lockdown side over there believes in. That's what we're advocating for. Literally. Very literally. That's what we're all about over there. She's like, oh, that's what I support. I'm like, yeah, that's what this is entirely about. So she completely believed with me. So this angry guy, he comes over, and me and the lady were talking about how the government should be basically telling people they need to take care of their health, they need to lose weight, they need to take care of their heart and their lungs. And so the angry guy comes over and he's like, so you think the government doesn't know about blah, blah, blah? I'm like, yeah, of course the government doesn't know. He's like, well, you think you know better than the government? Like, just outrage. You think you know better than the government? Yes! Of course! That's literally what I said. Yes, of course! Like, who doesn't know better than the government? Everyone knows better than the government. Our government is terrible. He just says, like, just shouts some curse words and walks away. I was amazed, though, at this guy's outrage. Like, think about how stupid you'd have to be. And I told it to the lady, I'm like, I've never met anyone with such little self-confidence that they think that the government knows better than they do about basically anything. Like, the government is so incompetent and ignorant. They'd mess everything up. Like, I still to this day don't believe that I've met anyone besides that guy who thinks that the government does everything right. That it's an outrage that somebody would even believe that they know better than the government's decision on one thing. On one thing. Like, the idea of this blew this guy's mind and threw him into a further rage. Oh my god, that's like the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Like, it's so crazy to me. That guy was the person in my many years of living who could benefit from watching this movie Don't Look Up more than anyone. Holy jeez. To be that wow. Just wow. You gotta be a dumbass. You have to have your head up your ass to a level that's just shocking. Like, you almost have to have your head so far up your ass that your, like, belly button is touching your butthole. Is how stupid you'd have to be to think that the government knows the best about everything at all times. Insane. 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 Because there's countless examples. There is countless examples. Oh my god. The Canadian government is wrong about almost everything. It's so demented to me that there's people out there who believe this. Who listen to somebody like Ethan Klein who says, Why would you even think about it? Like, the government knows what they're doing. Why would you even think about it? Literally tells his audience, why would you even think about it? You think about stuff? Why? The government, like, takes care of it. Why would you even think about it? Insane. And that guy still has a career. Ethan Klein still has a career. After saying that, after telling people, the public, don't think, don't look up. To me, this is one of the biggest problems that the world has. Because this problem perpetuates every other problem. It allows the government to continue to hurt people. The Canadian government, the leader, Justin Trudeau, called these people, right? Called millions of people terrorists, science deniers, anti-vax, extremists. Literally labeled millions of Canadians terrorists for protesting the outright harm, the abuse, the inhumane torment of millions of Canadians. People protesting that. Terrorists. Terrorists. And that jackass, Justin Trudeau, he's quitting being Prime Minister. But he's currently the Prime Minister. It's like, think about the harm that this mind mentality actually does. That the harm that people being ignorant, choosing to be ignorant, actually does. Because it's enormous. Because these tent cities are everywhere. Right? Like, Americans, your economic nightmare that's occurring, it was made worse by this. Not just because of the border restrictions, but the fact that Canada froze its own economy. That so many countries in the first world also froze their economies when they didn't need to. They never needed to. It never made any logical sense. It never made any scientific sense. It was never medically accurate. It was never needed. Right? And a lot of Americans don't even really know that this happened. They know that there was a trucker protest, but they never really gave a lot of thought of like, hey, what? Like, they still got COVID restrictions over there? That's weird. Like, you don't naturally think about how insane it is. Right? And the news doesn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Hollywood won't touch anything about COVID with a 10-foot pole. But you never imagine this. You never imagine you can't buy baby diapers. You never imagine, like, what? You'd never think that this would happen. And it makes sense that you wouldn't really think, like, oh, if that 3 months of lockdown that we had, if that lasted 3 years, what would that look like? It's dark. I'll tell you, it's dark, it's bad, it's horrible. There's kids who are like 3 years behind on their education who will never catch up. Kids in high school who can't read. I mean, there's always going to be kids in high school who can't read. Some of them. But it's actually a lot of them. Like, look at what teachers in Canada have said about this. Look at what medical professionals have said about this. That's one thing that the media won't touch this with the 10-foot pole. But there is doctors who lost their job. There is nurses who lost their job because they're like, I'm not going to get this vaccine. I've had COVID multiple times. Why would I get a vaccine that doesn't even work? Like, what is it going to do for me? I'm not going to potentially risk my health. There's people getting sick. There's people who have died from the vaccine for COVID. Right? Like, I'm not someone who's anti-vax at all. But I'm against unnecessary vaccination, especially when it's harming people. Like, I personally know people who almost died. I don't know somebody who actually died from the vaccine, but I know people who were close, who were hospitalized. I know more people who were hospitalized by the vaccine than were hospitalized by COVID. Like, it's crazy. It's actually crazy. And not to mention, the false information about the vaccine was insane. They roll this thing out, this rushed vaccine, and say, oh, it's 10% effective. But we're not going to tell you that till months after we've been given this to, like, billions of people. They got billions at that point, but like millions of people got the vaccine. Yeah, it's 10% effective. The media glossed right over that, right? Most media didn't even mention that. But people who are paying attention, it kind of caught their ear. Like, what? You're telling me it's 10% effective. What the hell does that mean, 10% effective? What is 10% effective? You're giving this to, like, how is this not front page news across every avenue of media? It's 10% effective. What? So, it's only giving you a 10% chance to not get the virus? That's like front page news. Everyone needs to know about this right now. If you talked about it, you're a science denier. You're anti-vax, conspiracy theorist, tinfoil. You're Alex Jones. Even though it's medical fact, even though that's what the pharmaceutical companies had to put with that medication they're injecting into everybody. Insane, right? Insane. Completely insane. Doesn't make any sense, right? But interesting is, what does that 10% mean? That's a question few people asked. Even people who are outraged by the news that it's 10% effective, that's shitty. That's horrible. Like, what? This was the solution. This was the light at the end of the tunnel. We were promised this was the light at the end of the tunnel. What does that even mean? Who cares? That's what the media said. Who cares? We don't care. Screw you. Who cares? Lock down. You need to get that vaccine. Another important thing about the vaccine. Well, two things. There's two things. First of all, that 10% effective doesn't mean it gives you a 10% less chance of getting it. We would later find out that what it meant is when you get it, if you haven't had COVID, if you haven't already built immunities, what it does for you is it makes it hit, when you get COVID, 10% less hard. Now, granted, 80% of people who get COVID never show even one symptom. But this makes it hit 10% less hard. If you don't get it though, if you don't get this vaccine, even if you know you've had COVID, even if you're not getting it, you're a science denier, you're killing grandma, it's your fault for COVID. It's all your fault. You're an evil piece of crap. That's what the media was saying. That's what Stephen Colbert was saying. That's what everyone on CNN was saying. That's what everyone at CBC, everyone in the liberal Canadian government, that's what they were saying. It was shoved down your throat. And a lot of people here in Canada, if you didn't get that vaccine, you couldn't work. Years into the pandemic, you didn't get that vaccine, you couldn't work. Even doctors and nurses and doctors who, worked throughout the pandemic. Screw you. What do you know about medical science, doctor and nurse? Screw you. You're going to take our medicine. You're going to take it. You don't need it. Who cares? You're taking it or you're fired. A lot of nurses, and quite a few doctors quit. They quit. They're like, screw this. I'm moving to America. This is terrible. Like, I'm already making pennies compared to what I'd make in America, and you're going to treat me like this? They left. Or they just switched careers because maybe they have a family or whatever here, and they just switched professions entirely. They're like, this is messed up. This is 80 levels of messed up. So that happened en masse. So when you hear about this trucker convoy in Canada, understand that it wasn't just truckers, it was farmers. Locally, the farmers must have been from pretty far, but they had a line of tractors going to the border here. Right? In my little small city of under 80,000. Like, it was all across Canada. Things had shifted. People had finally opened their eyes. And we're anti-lockdown. Finally. They were like, oh my God, what have we done? We didn't let people buy diapers for their babies? It's crazy. Like, you couldn't buy medical supplies for your babies or anyone? That's crazy. You couldn't buy stuff for your pets? That's crazy. So this goes wildly unreported. To this day, the fact that people don't talk about this, and I feel like that's kind of why people don't really talk about this movie. I think a lot of leftists watched this movie and were confused. They're like confused because the message of the film is maybe the experts that the media throws in front of you aren't really experts. Maybe the scientists they put in front of you, maybe it isn't that hard to be a scientist. Maybe these people don't know what the hell they're talking about. These experts, maybe they're not actually experts. Maybe they have some kind of other agenda. Maybe the media pundits themselves don't actually know what they're talking about. Maybe the government doesn't actually know what they're talking about. Or maybe they're being deceptive. I think that's the true horror of this film. This is actually a horror film for radical leftists. Because what this is shining a mirror on you and saying, hey, you're blind to reality. You and reality are miles apart. You are ignorant to science and what's happening. You are keeping your eyes closed. You are refusing to look up. So like I said, these protests were enormously supported by Canadians. Overwhelmingly supported by Canadians. It wasn't just truckers, it was farmers, it was nurses, it was everyone. And it was awesome. Now, it made me proud to be a Canadian, but the thing is, we allowed them to shut us down for years. We allowed this to happen. Like, you couldn't buy medical supplies. And the government was telling us that that'll be good for our health. I remember I couldn't get medical care. Literally immune system medication. I did not have access to from March of 2020 to like I think it was late July of 2020. So for months I couldn't access because my doctor's office was closed. Doctor's offices were closed. Like, it was insane here in Canada. Like, they literally shut down the medical system enormously. You couldn't see a specialist. Your doctor's offices were closed for months. Therefore, I couldn't receive my immune system medication for months during a global pandemic popping off. Think about that. That's why I thought about it from day one. That's why I was looking up from day one. But ultimately, I knew I would be okay. Because I knew I was getting the virus anyway, and I knew 80% of people don't even show one symptom. So I'm like, you know what? I have a shitty immune system. I'm not able to access my medication because it needs to be administered by my family doctor. This might hit me pretty hard, but I'm going to survive it. And I did. It did hit me hard, and I did survive it. I wasn't hospitalized, but it sucked. It wasn't great. It was literally like during my birthday. But I'm like, everything shut down anyway. It's not like I was going to have a birthday party in freaking April of 2020. But Yeah. To me this movie makes some points that should be very clear to Canadians. So the fact that I've heard 2 Canadians very falsely, almost entirely correctly come to a conclusion about what this movie's about, for them to actually get it like completely wrong, I'm like, I gotta make a review about this. I gotta talk about what was actually happening in these times and the times right after this time, and what you should be taking from this movie, I think is actually very important to everyone, because things were crazy. Things were completely insane and inhumane, and this is truly a horror film because the people who bought into it, who kept their eyes closed, they attacked verbally through social media, but sometimes, in person. They bought into this hook, line, and sinker, this media division, this division that the government was perpetuating and pushing forward. They bought into it. They participated. They made it happen, right? They're why it took so long to get to something actually happening and forcing the government to actually make change. Because this protest was successful. The lockdowns ended after this. It wasn't like instant, but it started to happen because it had to. Because they blocked the Canadian government. Right? Like, this is the Parliament building in Ottawa. They couldn't ignore this. They could only ignore it. They ignored it for as long as they could, but they couldn't ignore it forever. Right? This is how you do a protest. But this should have happened way sooner, and it should have been way bigger. It still was unquestionably enormous, but it should have been bigger. It should have happened like 2 years sooner at least. And yeah, media won't even talk about it. And the people who perpetuated it, who made it take years longer than did it, were the people who sowed the division, who parroted the talking points of Pfizer, of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government, of the CBC, of CNN. They misled people. They were misled, and they tried to shove it down your throat to mislead other people, right? They supported the lockdowns. They supported doctors' offices being shut down. They supported people not being able to buy diapers for their baby and medical supplies for their baby and dog food. They supported it. They told you are a science-denying, hateful, grandma-killing terrorist if you so much as spoke out against it. And that's dark. That's really dark. That's it. Like, this is... It's so hard to even express how truly dark it is to people who didn't even remotely experience it, which is what happened in America. You didn't remotely experience lockdown, in all honesty. Now, that's harsh to say to people who are out of work for 3 months. So, I'm sorry, 3 months compared to 3 years is a giant difference. Especially when it's a way harder lockdown, beyond what you could even imagine. Right? Like, it sounds like it's a first world problem, but it's kind of more, it's one of the most non-first world problems. Like, just horrific, right? Because even in the third world in these times, they just didn't even lock down. This store would be open in the third world in these times. Like, just like my American relatives were like, what? COVID? That in 2021, they're like, what? COVID? Lockdown? Well, that was last year. Like, COVID's over, man. What are you talking about? In the third world, it never even was in 2020. It never even started. There never even was a COVID. Even though everyone in that country got COVID multiple times, there never was a pandemic. So yeah, I think this is the most important movie to talk about. I think people enormously, even people who reviewed the movie for a large extent, well, honestly, the ones that I saw, they at least actually kind of like understood that, hey, this isn't like a left-wing, right-wing thing. And if it was, it would be anti-left-wing for sure. But there was people who reviewed it who thought this was like an anti-right-wing movie. And it's not. It's 1,000% not. Watch it. It's not like great. Like, I'm not saying you're going to have a great time watching this. But it's, if you're a left-wing person, especially a Canadian or anyone who's left-wing and not an American, or doesn't lives in a country that locked down more than America did, this will be a horror film to you, because what this is going to do, it's going to show you that you spread propaganda, you bought into propaganda, you spread it, you shamed other people, you bullied other people, you told people you need to inject this medication even though you don't need it. I don't care if you're a nurse, I don't care if you're a doctor, I don't care if you're a scientist, I don't care if you're a teacher. You deserve to lose your job if you don't inject what Pfizer tells you to. And that's horrific. Because that led to tent cities. That led to kids not eating. That led to overdose, drug crisis, housing crisis. It made the economy so much worse. You did that. You did that. You pro-lockdown piece of crap. So it's horrific. Because people don't want to accept that. They don't want to accept that they bought into the lies. They bought into the propaganda. And tried to enforce it and push it on other people with vaccine mandates, with vaccine passports. Because the evil person is you. You who did that, you did evil deeds. You did. And that's scary. That's terrifying. Not just to you, but to other people. The fact that you did that, to me, it's scary that you did that. So to you that you did that, knowing that you did that, it's got to be really scary. Because I'm telling you, what happened here in Canada went beyond inhumane. It really did. I don't know if this movie will ever make it onto one of my horror tier lists, or and maybe it would. Maybe I should make a tier list of non-horror movies that are scary as hell. I would put movies like Compliance, right? Similar thing, Compliance, the story of the girl who worked at the McDonald's and the female manager, and some creepo calls the manager saying he's a cop and tells her to like strip search the girl, and then her husband comes and he has the husband come strip search the girl, and then things just escalate, and it's like, why'd these people go along with it? That's insane. That's a real thing that actually happened. So that movie's terrifying, because it's like, there's actually idiots out there who get convinced to do horrific crimes, and they're just everyday people. They're out there. They're everywhere. And I think Don't Look Up actually has that same message, and maybe not even intentionally, but on a larger scale. Because what happened literally affects almost every person on the planet. Any person who has any, like this global economy is screwed. This housing crisis is like everywhere. This is like a planet-wide butchering that a lot of people perpetuated and made worse. You you perpetuating the propaganda of Pfizer in the Canadian government or whatever, Italy. These protests happened all over the place, right? The UK, similar protests to this trucker convoy happened in a lot of countries, right? A lot. I think like Germany, because a lot of these countries were locked down for years. And you know what that did? You know what the combined effect of that does? It destroys people through money. And we're going to be feeling the devastation for decades. And to me, that's actually scary. That's incredibly scary. You know, I think one of the most recent movies I reviewed was Terrifier 3. A scary horror film, right? Killer clown, scary. But real life stuff is pretty damn scary as well. So I think this movie actually deserves a lot of recognition as a horror film.